Yo, what's good, Spirit Squad? As always, it's your boy Dre, and today we're going to talk about one of the most iconic cards to be spoiled from Modern Horizons 2, Counterspell. Now, when I say Counterspell, I don't mean like Mana Leak or Mana Beak or any other situational card that may get outpaced by fast mana or could simply show up against the wrong kind of deck, for example, Spell Piercer or Flusterstorm. What I mean is straight up Ultra Chad Counterspell that's been pissing people off for much longer than I've been playing Magic. So, because Counterspell has been very good and is super iconic and has been here for the entirety of Magic the Gathering's history, what we would like to do, as a blue deck, is explore whether Counterspell is really what we want in our Spirits list. By nature, we are a bit of a reactive deck. We're already playing pseudo-counterspell effects, right? Like we're playing Mausoleum Wanderer, we're playing Spell Queller, we're playing Force and Negation, and now it's kind of time to see whether just a hard 2-mana counterspell that doesn't attack is really worth our time. So the first thing we're going to do is check out the modern metagame to see if Counterspell is even really in a good spot for us at all. So we'll talk about the deck building costs of playing Counterspell, because honestly, there are many. And once we talk about whether we want Counterspell and how hard is it to fit Counterspell into our deck, we'll check out a bit of a sample deck list that I've drawn up to see just how reasonable it is to actually play Counterspell and in what kind of deck would you want to be trying it. So the first thing, like I said, we want to do is see if we even really want Counterspell. So what I've done, as always, is pulled up a bit of a MTG Goldfish metagame result here. And we'll see that all of the decks that I think Counterspell is straight up terrible against, I've put in red. Any of the decks that I think Counterspell is great against, I've circled in green. You know, red for stop, green for go. And in matchups where I think Counterspell is either fine or is wishy-washy, I've put in white, and we'll talk about why for those of whom. So, for the big elephant in the room, that's going to be Blue-Red Blitz. I think Counterspell is straight up terrible. The deck is hyper efficient, and almost all of their spells cost either 0 or 1 mana. The ones that cost 2, we don't want Counterspell against if they happen to be on the play. So, Counterspell does really nothing against a Monastery. So, Swiftspear, a Soulscar Mage, it doesn't really stop too much of like the Lava Dart shenanigans, and when they are on the play, Counterspell also does nothing against Sprite Dragon or Stormwing Entity, making Counterspell a pretty terrible include for us as Spirits pilots, since we're not trying to play cards like Fatal Push in a main to really complement these counterspells. So not really a matchup where you want it. And the same is going to go for Boros aggro, except Boros aggro leans even more into the 1-drop spot than Blue-Red does, making White-Red aggro an even worse counterspell for matchup for us than it is against Blue-Red. So now that we've got our terrible matchups out of the way, we'll talk about spots where we really want Counterspell. For example, both versions of Tron, Eldrazi Tron and Mono Green Tron, Counterspell's fantastic there. Against Blue-Red Through the Breach, well, they're trying to resolve a Through the Breach. Actual factual Counterspell is pretty good there because, like, you know, if you try to counterspell with a Spell Pierce, they can simply wait until turn 7 or whatever. Like, that's a thing that they have access to. Same kind of goes for Scape Shift. Scape Shift just has a giant pile of lands, and if they're trying to resolve a Bring to Light or resolve a Scape Shift, most of the time, all they would have to do is wait 1 or 2 extra turns so that they can evade Mausoleum Wanderer, and they can just hold up like a Lightning Bolt for Spell Queller. But if you're playing actual Counterspell, nothing in this earth is going to save them if they're trying to resolve that, and we're fighting a fight on the stack, right? Same kind of goes for Amulet Titan. So resolving a big old 6-drop is pretty scary, but with Counterspell, that's going to happen a lot less often. Esper Control, Ponza, Niftalite, and regular Burn all have their cards that we would just really appreciate countering most of the things from each of those decks. So like countering a Kai's Guile feels pretty great. Countering a Karn the Great Creator, mwah, chef's kiss. Countering a Scape Shift or a Bring to Light itself or a Niv Mizzet, also insane. Countering really anything from Burn feels good, and really anything that costs more than 3 mana out of Tron. Like, both of those are going to be spots where we really want Counterspell. And in our neutral matchups here, I've got Heliod Company because Counterspell's ultra hit or miss against them. It's a great hit when you're able to actually like counterspell a Heliod or counterspell a Walking Ballista and then stop their combo from getting rid of us, right? Those things feel pretty good. The downside to counterspell against Heliod Company is that when they're on the play, they can still just go Arbor Elf turn 1, Utopia Sprawl, and then collect a company on turn 2 before we're able to untap a second source of mana and play our counterspell to stop to collect the company. That's not really a plan that's on the table when they have the cool things and are on the play, which actually happens kind of often, which, you know, can suck. Also, they play a lot of like just mana dorks and stuff, so if we're holding up mana to counterspell, we don't have an Aether Vial, well, they can just like beat us down with their creatures while we're holding up 2 mana scared of collected company. Like I said, pretty medium as far as that matchup goes. Against Dredge, well, we don't always win a die roll. When we are on the play, cards like Thrilling Discovery and cards like Cathartic Reunion, and even to some extent Life in Alone, it's pretty sweet to counterspell any of those 3 things, right? You're never going to counterspell a Shriekhorn because that's just going to come out turn 1, but countering any of their 2 mana cards is pretty sweet. Unfortunately, if they're on the play, that plan is off the table, making counterspell medium against Dredge. However, counterspelling an Ox of Agonis, even late game, that's nice. Another neutral spot is going to be Jund Death Shadow. Now, Jund Death Shadow plays a bunch of just hyper-efficient cards, right? And sometimes you'll get to counterspell like Luris, or a big old Scourge of Skyclaves, or they're trying to get you with a Temur Battle Rage, but hiya, you were holding a counterspell the whole time. Like, sometimes counterspell is going to be really good against them. Unfortunately, counterspell is also pretty medium against them sometimes because they just play a bunch of Thoughtseizes and Inquisitions, right? But also on the turns where they're holding up like Thoughtseize and then like double Death Shadow with their 3 mana on the table, one counterspell is not solving that problem. We are still just going to die, and it's going to be awful for just us. So these are going to be like, you know, there's going to be some hit or miss. Like sometimes the card's great, sometimes the card's terrible, but we need to know that about counterspell when we're playing it against this style of deck. And then the last one here for our neutral spots is going to be Mono Red Prowess. And the reason I call it neutral is because it still does not help against the Monastery Swiftspear Soulscar Mage part of their deck. However, it's pretty good against the part of their deck that actually wants to like cast Obosh as a creature, casting all their Blood Moon effects. It can counter a Seasoned Pyromancer. So counterspell does have legs against that deck, but sometimes they will just get the low to the ground half of their deck and then run you over anyway. So when we look at the meta here, there are a lot more good spots for counterspell than there are bad or even neutral spots for counterspell, which means that I do think that counterspell is at least worth exploring. It may or may not end up being, you know, the thing to go to because Blue-Red Prowess is the best deck in the format right now. And when you're playing a card that's a little medium against the best deck in the format, you just got to know what you're getting into. But I think the other decks that are surrounding Blue-Red Prowess are pretty much all at least reasonable spots for counterspell, making this a slightly approved. I think this is okay. I don't think it's great, but I think it's okay. And now that we do know a little more about whether we even want counterspell in the first place, what we're going to do here is explore a bit of a sample deck list that I brought up here. And here it is. And this is going to be a deck that features 3 counterspells, 4 Aether Vials, and a giant pile of spirits. We've also complemented the 3 main deck counterspells here with 2 Force Negations as well. And we'll go over why in a second there too. So the first thing we're going to touch on in this deck mana base. In this deck's mana base, we've taken out almost all of the cool utility lands or shuffled some around because we want to have turn 2 double blue mana as often as possible. To that end, the only lands in our deck that do not produce blue mana here are going to be the 1 Moorland Haunt and the 1 Basic Plains. So we've got 3 Basic Islands, 3 Hallowed Fountains, 4 Flooded Strands, and 4 Polluted Deltas, and these are going to make it so that you can find your Hallowed Fountains as reliably as possible. We've also got 4 Seachrome Coast, that's pretty standard fare, but we've shuffled around our 2 Horizon Canopies into being Waterlogged Groved, and these are going to make it so that you're able to just hold up the blue mana on turn 2 as often as possible. We have also shuffled around our creature base here. You'll notice that there are no mono-white creatures in this deck other than Skyclave Apparition. So there's not going to be any Thalia, there's not going to be any Unsettled Mariner, there's not going to be any Selfless Spirit, because we want to give ourselves incentive to look for the 1 basic planes as little as possible, so that we are more incentivized to actually look for double blue mana. So Skyclave Apparition aside, everything in our deck here is gonna be blue, which also makes Force Negation very good, because now instead of like having 20 or 21 cards to pitch to Force, we get to play 31 cards in this list that pitch to Force Negation, so that it's a really reliable card to be casting for free. Say you're playing against something like Through the Breach or Esper Control or Tron, you really want to be able to pitch a card reliably to that Force, instead of maybe crossing your fingers and holding up 3 mana. So what we've done here is amassed a little over 90% of the time, when you see 2 lands, those 2 lands are both going to produce blue. So that's going to be what we get out of playing 19 of 21 of your lands that actually make blue. That part's awesome. The part that we're going to miss out on, though, is, like I said, we're not playing as many utility lands. And the biggest thing that we'll notice that we're not playing here is going to be Cavernous Souls, which, hilariously enough, you're playing Cavernous Souls so that you can play Counterspell, but playing Cavernous Souls makes you strong against Counterspell, but you're playing Counterspell to weaken yourself against Counterspell. Look, alright, I don't understand either. I just work here. So we're going to get to do some pretty sweet things with our mana, though. We're still playing, of course, all 4 Aether Vials, and this is going to be a thing that comes up fairly often. When you're playing on turn 2, a lot of the times you don't actually want to be holding up the card Counterspell. You still just want to be jamming creatures down their throat, because remember, at the end of the day, we are still an aggro deck. We need to be attacking. That's how we win games. But the mana that we've got here allows us to produce double blue as early as possible, basically every game. And that's kind of the goal here with that mana base, is making it so that we are actually able to play as much Counterspell as we are able to. Again, downsides, we're not playing a second Moorland Haunt. We're playing no Cavernous Souls in this list. And because we are playing Waterlogged Grove instead of Horizon Canopy, we will need to be aware that Skyclave Apparition can be a little hard to cast in this list. So those are going to be your downsides of not playing Counterspell. And of course, the upside is that we have a reasonable defensive card against a lot of these big mana and slower decks. So against the Primeval Titan list, against Bring to Light, against Tron variants, Counterspell is great against all of those things. And that's going to be really where you want to make a decision as to whether you think the deck building costs to playing a card like Counterspell are enough to outweigh the deck building are enough to outweigh the positives that you'll get by having better matchups against so many decks. So that's going to be my input on the card Counterspell and whether I think it's reasonable in this format. So if you think that Counterspell is either too hard to cast, maybe I should be playing something like a Mystic Gate to make Skyclave Apparition easier, maybe you think that Counterspell is awesome and you're sick of losing to Tron, whatever the scenario is, make sure you let me know right in the comments, because I'd love to hear the discussion and the talking points and all that other good stuff. If you think that, Counterspell is completely unreasonable because of how good Prowess is, yeah, sure, let me know. I understand that that's a cost. So put that right in the comments as well. Let me know what you think. If you like what you're watching, as always, make sure to click like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and I will see y'all on the next one.